Hello friends and welcome to episode 3 of the F-Zero GX experience. In the last episode I toppled both the Ruby and Sapphire Cups on Expert Class, narrowly avoiding disaster on Mute City serial gaps by the barest of margins. If you're new here, I recommend you check out that video, and a link to the full series playlist will be in the description below. Next up is the Emerald Cup, and we're sticking with our boy Beastman in the Hyperspeeder. Now on previous difficulties, I found this cup less challenging than Sapphire, mainly because the Emerald Cup presents us with a different profile of track. And what I mean by this is that the circuits here are less an overt test of skill, but instead a test of concentration. Most of the courses here, if not all, tend to exceed 3 minutes. There are fewer acute turns and chicanes to navigate, and barely any environmental hazards to dodge, the likes of which are common in the earlier tracks. Circuits like Double Branches and Ordeal are challenging in their own way because they test your endurance, as opposed to your reflexes. And for me personally, shorter, intricate tracks like Drift Highway and Serial Gaps pose a sterner examination of skill, because even a minor mistake can prove impossible to recover from. I found it difficult to establish a solid lead on Cylinder Knot, and for much of this race, the opposition stayed within 1 second of my pace. I've since learnt of 4 additional boost pads that I wasn't aware of, which could explain why I struggled to break away from the chasing pack. I assume the CPU racers are hitting most of, if not all of the zippers, and this almost paid off for the Black Bull on the final stretch of lap 3, but because of the Hyperspeeder's far superior boost power, and the Black Bull being one of, if not the heaviest ships in the game, I scored the victory and got off to a perfect start. I took the lead reasonably early on intersection, only to then lose it after crashing into this rail. Some back and forth ensued, and I traded the lead with 3 or 4 other vehicles, coming into the final lap in 3rd place. I led upon exiting the pipe for the final time, and honestly I thought I had this race in the bag, but my confidence would be my undoing. I got too close to the rail in my approach to the final corner and crashed out. Now I realised in that run I had been much too passive with my boost, and so on the retry I set out to right that wrong. I built a healthy lead by the midway point, however when trying to line up the penultimate turn I lost my grip and crashed out once again. On my 3rd run I built an even bigger lead, but this time blew it by smashing into this pipe. I eventually saw off a late surge by the Black Bull, and this time I wouldn't be denied, despite the game's best efforts. I hit the front during the opening lap of Double Branches and never looked back. I increased my lead with each lap, and I did learn something new here in that you can fly through the yellow lightning motif on the boost pad and still get the boost. There was still the odd hiccup throughout, but this was a solid run. The only disappointment was that the Black Bull seemed determined to keep me honest with another 2nd place. With only 2 lives remaining, I knew that half pipe was a danger. And due to the lack of rails, there's no shortage of opportunities to put a step wrong and end up exiting the course. And whether you can control your vehicle quickly enough and land it safely is another matter entirely. Here's one such example. I hit the boost plate here at an angle which sends me sky high, above the limits of the track, but I was able to right my ship and land it safely. Despite really wanting to play this circuit cautiously, I struggled to build a lead, and eventually succumbed to the same part I just highlighted 1 lap later. Down to 1 life, I pledged to play this last attempt safely, no matter the outcome, as demonstrated by this time going wide of that same boost pad to prevent going airborne. All was going well until I found a new way to perish, as I clipped the rail parallel to the energy strip. And so that sent me back to Cylinder Knot, where despite a strange wobble here, I recorded a reasonably straightforward victory. I learnt something new in intersection, that you can smash into the trees at the start. There were the usual wall clips here and there, but victory beckoned and I duly obliged, snaffling a 53-point lead to boot. It was rinse and repeat for Double Branches, the odd bump but otherwise a comfortable 9-second victory with my lead stretching to 77 points. I tried to play half pipe sensibly, but part of me just didn't want to. Predictably this led to yet another crash out. On the retry, I built a 3-second lead and maintained this to the end, despite my grip randomly disappearing at this laser section. Finally, I had reached Ordeal, and I had an unassailable lead. All I needed to do was make it to the finish line and victory was assured. With 2 lives in the bank, I didn't see how I could screw this up. Except that's almost exactly what happened barely 30 seconds into the race, when I clipped a rail before this jump. Seconds later, the same thing happened when I clipped the structure way above the track it's aligned with. I struggle with this stage in general, and on this run I hit many walls and I missed so many turns on the first lap alone that I was surprised to still be in contention. Something else that I realised here is that if you pull your car up from its diving position when taking a jump and land parallel with the floor, you can retain some of the additional speed you build during your descent, which has obvious benefits. I led entering the final lap, and despite a couple of butt-clenching moments where I could have crashed out, I remained amongst the leaders heading into the final straight where, against the odds, I was able to clutch out the win and bag the full 500 points. I took a moment to soak up the glory, and then...
shit just got real.
But first, there was the little matter of clearing Diamond Cup on Expert. Cosmo Terminal was pretty smooth. I boosted like my life depended on it, and by the time I was into lap 3, I had a colossal 12-second lead. I cruised around the final stretch and... that is when my dog decided to distract me. Never mind, but I got back on the horse and immediately produced an even better, faster run, which I closed out. I decided to go aggressive with lateral shift, and to eliminate the Black Bull when an opportunity presented itself. Unfortunately, I connected with it mid-spin attack and almost had my own race ended. I recovered, but only long enough to then drive straight off of the stage. On the retry, I failed once again at eliminating the Black Bull, and despite an early mistake, I managed to hit the front near the end of the first lap. From here I boosted consistently and opened up a nice lead. I absent-mindedly emptied my energy bar on the final lap with the tricky last corner still to come and was almost made to pay for this. But thankfully I crossed the line in first place, extending my lead to 36 points. On undulation, I lost my grip early on one of the rhythmic slopes and then almost dumped a second life in the lava here, barely managing to stay on the track. I assumed the lead pretty soon after though and held things together to comfortably make it 3 wins from 3. In a previous video, I described Dragon Slope as the Diamond Cup track that you could be most assured of winning. And I stand by that claim, but winning becomes tricky when you've already lost a few lives and then this happens. With no lives remaining, I could have played it cautiously, but knowing what was to immediately follow, I wanted to give myself the biggest points buffer that I could manage. I went into lap 3 with a 6-second advantage and managed to extend this thanks to hitting some of the upper echelon slopes. I won at a canter, giving me a massive but not quite unassailable lead going into Phantom Road. So with no lives remaining, this was it. One run, and one run only to seal the deal. I rose as high as 3rd position in the opening moments, but it wasn't to last. If you hit a wall in one of these slimline lanes, you'll eventually end up being bounced around back and forth like a pinball, and the AI racing past you only extends this misery. Soon enough I was again at the rear of the pack, but I caught up during the second go around, and with the twin Narita still not troubling the leaders, I was optimistic, until the Fire Stingray smacked me into a different dimension. Back to the grind. I immediately started a new run, but this seemed to commence a period of stagnation, repetition, and ultimately a lack of progress. I would lose many lives to Trident and Lateral Shift, some of which I'm showing you here. And this loss of life led me back to the idea of getting aggressive. You see, for every 5 opponents you're able to eliminate, F-Zero GX will reward you with an additional life, and Trident, with its lack of edges, serves as something of an ideal hunting ground. So I set to work at becoming the most cerebral and frankly murderous little racer that I could. There were occasions where I earned an extra life, but then proceeded to die on Trident anyway. Other times I got greedy and decided to try and farm 2 or even 3 additional lives. I became transfixed on the idea that I needed to start this Grand Prix with as many lives as possible. I spent upwards of an hour trying to nail this tactic, and whilst I don't regret it, because the ability to eliminate other vehicles may yet come in handy on Masterclass, it is something I've reflected on. I allowed one incident on Phantom Road to change the way that I was approaching the game, despite already possessing the skills to beat this particular cup. And whilst the extra lives are of course helpful, the reality is that for this cup, on this difficulty, I didn't need them. and eventually I got on this run where I made the Black Bull, a frequent rival of mine, my 5th kill, securing the extra life. Assuming the lead, I elected to close out this race without undue risk. Onto lateral shift once again, and the Black Bull tried to get his own back on me here. But after bypassing it and barely staying on the track here, I boosted throughout in what was a reasonably clean run, carrying a 32-point lead into undulation. In retrospect, I played this track poorly for several reasons. Firstly, I tried to repeat the 5 kill trick to farm an additional life and eliminate my rivals. There wasn't a need to do this because, as I said in my first GX video, on average of around 10 CPU racers will always fail to finish this race, and upon reaching this stage, I still held my full quota of lives. Playing in this style cost me 2 of those, and lastly it cost me points, because I didn't even win the race. I took 4th in the end, and honestly, I was feeling a little frustrated. But I still had 3 lives left, and my mood improved immensely when I took out my rival, the Twin Narita on Dragon Slope. At the start of the 3rd lap, I had a heart-in-mouth moment where I slammed into this guardrail at the entrance to the slopes, almost reenacting my previous death on this circuit. I conceded a position or 2, but I was quick to recover, taking an unassailable 125-point lead into Phantom Road with 3 lives to boot. I felt that I'd improved at GX since picking it up, and I was keen to pit my skills against Phantom Road. At various points in the opening and second laps, I found myself in the upper positions, and even briefly led the race, but the same problems emerged from my last run, and I found myself rapidly falling to the back of the pack. As a level, I actually like Phantom Road a lot. It's very unique, and navigating it represents a fun challenge, but it's undoubtedly one of those stages which requires an enormous amount of practice to reach a skill level which may enable you to reliably trouble the top spots. In the end, I had to settle for a 27th place finish. And that concluded Expert Class, and with Master left to come, it was time to take that final step up. However, that will follow in the next video, because this concludes this episode of the F-Zero GX experience. If you enjoyed this episode, which I sincerely hope was the case, please drop a like, and thank you very much as always for taking the time to watch. If you're not already subscribed, then please consider doing so. There will be a link to the full playlist for this series in the description below if you've missed a previous video. Keep it locked to the channel as always for future content, and I'll see you soon. Same place, new episode.